Today is Rosh Chodesh Shvat, Aleph Shvat Tavshinayim Vov. We are in Teres Menachem, Sefer HaMamorim, Tavshin Yud Gimel, in the Mamar Vayihiyu Chayei Sara, Shabbos Pashas Chayei Sara, on page Mem, at the paragraph beginning of Biru Inyan. The Rebbe began by asking why the pasuk, the verse in the Torah, breaks down the age of Sarah's life into three segments, mentioning the word Shana, years, by each one, and then including them all together into one general phrase. The Rebbe then began to explain, he brought the Zohar, that Sarah was different than all other women in the Torah, in the sense that she descended into this world and ascended from this world in a spiritual sense, intact. And not only that, but she also brought tikkun to the various spheres and places that she went, and through the various experiences that she had during her lifetime. And the Rebbe also explained the Talmud, which says that the Bnei Yisrael have gone into exile in order to add converts. And the Rebbe explained this as meaning in order to extract the fragments and sparks of holiness that are embedded deeply within Golus, within exile, through the process known as Shviras HaKelim, the shattering of the vessels. And the idea of going into exile is the idea of interacting with these various aspects and lifting them into holiness. And the Rebbe explained that this process of refinement, of interacting with these fragments and sparks, and lifting them, not only redeems them, so to speak, but in addition, that also infuses Kedusha, holiness, with an added energy which it didn't possess before this process of engagement with the Nitzutzis, these divine sparks and fragments. The Rebbe here is going on to explain this in more detail. How is it that through the interaction with these elements, we add in Kedusha, in holiness, something which Kedusha did not have on its own in its natural state before this process? And in order to explain this, the Rebbe refers to Shviras HaKelim. And I'll say it by heart, and then we'll see how the Rebbe says it using his words. If you remember, we learned in the previous Maimer, the Rebbe explained the idea that in Tohu, in the world of chaos, as it were, the Eires, the lights, the energies were merubim, abundant, and the vessels were diminished. The Kabbalistic term for that is Eires merubim and Kelim mu'atim, abundant lights and diminished or minimal vessels. Whereas in Tikkun and below, you have Eires mu'atim, Tikkun meaning the world of Atzilus and so on and forth, the fixed world, corrected world, the repaired world, which repairs the chaos and the destruction and the fragmentation of Tohu, the shattering of Tohu. Over there you have Eires mu'atim and Kelim merubim, or let's focus on the Kelim merubim, more abundant vessels. So let's go back to the first part of this puzzle, as it were. Let's focus on Tohu for a moment. The Rebbe explained that when we say abundant lights, we're not talking about a quantitative abundance, but rather a qualitative one. Meaning to say that it's a different type of energy. It's an inherently different type of Eir. Similar to the idea of the Eir, the light that prevailed in the world, B'Sheishis and Mebreshis, when Hashem created the world, which the world was not fit to use. It wasn't fit for use in the world as we know it, in our world. And Hashem concealed it in the Torah. And through that, tzaddikim are able to see what's happening. And as the Rebbe mentioned, that the Baal Shem Tov was able to see physically, sitting here, he was able to see physically what was going on in a geographically distant location. it's a different type of light. Fundamentally so. That's the idea of Eiris Merubim, meaning that it is qualitatively different. It is qualitatively abundant. It's a far more powerful, infinitely more powerful energy.
It's the same light, but we use the same name.
We use the same name, but it's something completely different because we have no other way of describing it. But it's really and truly, it's a different type of light, it's a different type of seeing, and therefore it's a different type of sight, as it were, or revelation. Now, you would think conversely, when you say Kelim Mu'atim, that over there you're also talking about a qualitative diminishing. Says the Rebbe, no. Brings from the middle Rebbe. This is the point that he makes over here, that when you say Kelim Mu'atim, over there it's quantitative. Or rather, so therefore when you talk about Atzilus, and you say it's Kelim Merubim, when you talk from Tikkun and down, where the Kelim are Merubim, where the Kelim are abundant, you're not talking about a qualitative abundance, but rather a quantitative one. Meaning to say, when you say, what does it mean, Kelim Mu'atim? That the vessels in Toyu were diminished. It means to say they were immature. They were not capable to handle the oil, the energy, the light of Toyu. Whereas from Tikkun and down, the Kelim are. What is the function of a Keli? The function of a Keli is to contain the light and to regulate the light, reveal the light, the energy. How? By regulating it. Another way of saying that, or another element in that, is to extract from the light the various aspects within that light, within that energy, and to focus it on what it needs to be focused. Which is the idea of ischalkus, fragmentation, taking the light and breaking it down, taking this pure, unformed energy and making it useful. That's ischalkus, fragmentation. That's one of the functions of the kelim, is to fragment the energy. The lower you go, the more fragmentation there is. That's the idea of kelim merubim. So there, when you talk about kelim merubim, when you say the term abundant vessels, mature vessels, meaning that's another way of saying more hischalkus, more fragmentation, a quantitative abundance rather than a qualitative one. That's the point that Rebbe makes here over and above what he said in the previous Mamar. In the previous Mamar, the Rebbe explained the idea of Eiros Merubim, abundant lights. That is a qualitative abundance. It's meaning to say it's an inherently different type of energy, infinitely greater type of energy, completely different.
But the Rebbe can also see the whole world. So does that mean that the fragmentation has been more as time goes?
Certainly, because let's put it this way. You cannot compare to the. Let's put it this way. How does Shviras HaKelim work? The shattering of the vessels. How does it work? In very general terms, you have Olam HaToyu, which is a Olam. It's a realm. It's a sphere. It's a visage. If that's the right term. It's a realm, which was created by Hashem as a necessary component within the chain order of creation. It's a way of taking the divine energies and constricting them and reducing them down and down. Can't go straight from the highest levels to the lowest levels. You need levels in between, including a realm, a visage, which can't handle, where they come together and they can't handle each other, as it were. And then you move to the next stage where, okay, now we can. Now what happened at Shviras HaKelim? That's Toyu. Toyu is the shattering of the vessels. What happened? The Rapach Netzutzes, 288 fragments fell. The Oir of Toyu, the divine energies of Toyu, receded back into the source. Although some remnant of the Oiris clung to the fragments, and those fragments fell. Where did they fall? into the realms below. So part of we learned about this in the Mamar also. The most refined aspects fell into Bria. Whatever, let's put it this way. There were certain aspects of the fragments that were redeemable. So they went back to Atzilus. They sort of got incorporated into Atzilus, and they're okay. They were mesukan. They became fixed. They were repaired. Then the lower aspects of it fell into Toyu. Fell into Bria and got absorbed and became part of the operating system of Bria. The coarser aspects went down to Yetzirah, became part of the operating system of Yetzirah. The coarser aspects even more went down into Asiya and became incorporated into Asiya. And the coarser aspects yet, that couldn't even get absorbed into Asiya, fell into Klippa. To the other side of Kedusha. The opposite of Kedusha, that's where Klippa comes in. That's where the opposite of Kedusha, of holiness, the opposition to Kedusha comes in. Right? And that is for us to repair. Now obviously, someone who operates a neshama, like you mentioned, the tzaddik, who operates at the level of Atzilus, so to speak, his frame of reality is different. It doesn't mean that being a physical being, he's aware of Klippa and so on and so forth, and what goes on in this world. But that's what makes him a tzaddik. That his frame of reference is an Atzilus frame of reference. Right? Does that sort of answer your question? So, going back to the point that Rebbe makes, so the idea of kelim mu'atim, kelim merubim means it's a quantitative abundance. It causes greater hischalkos, it causes greater fragmentation of the eir. That's the point that Rebbe makes in this Maimer over and above the previous Maimer. Let's try to see a few lines inside. Page Mem will be your Inyan to explain this idea. Which idea? That through interacting with Gashmias, through the process of Avedus Abrudim, through the process of refinement, we not only redeem the sparks of divine energy, the fragments of divine energy that are exiled in physicality. Not only do we redeem them, but that process also adds something additional, something innovative into Kedusha, into holiness that it didn't possess before we engaged when engaged in this process. How is that? That's what the Rebbe explains here. It is known that the sparks or the fragments that are embedded within physical matter, their root is from the lights of the world of Tayu, the world of chaos. Right? That's where the Gashmis possesses within it elements from even beyond Tikkun. Now, when we talk about the lights, the energies, the godly energies of Eilam HaTayu, of the realm of Tayu, they are abundant lights, as mentioned before. In contrast to the divine energies of the realm of Tikkun, where the lights, the energies are diminished relative to what? To Tayu. It was explained earlier in the previous Maimer. It's also explained in a number of places. That when we talk about the term, when we say the term abundant lights, in reference to Tayu, we're not talking about a quantitative abundance. Rather, we are talking about, we mean, a qualitative abundance. Meaning to say, in other words, that it's qualitatively a different type of energy. That is, so far as the Eiris, the divine energies are concerned, the lights are concerned. But it's only that when we refer to the abundance of vessels in the realm of Tikkun, over there we are indeed referring to a quantitative abundance. And then as mentioned before, what does it mean a quantitative abundance? The function of the Keli, the character of the Keli is more abundant, is more Keli-like than the Kelim that preceded in the higher realms of Tayu. Meaning to say that if in Tayu the Kelim were mu'atim, the vessels were diminished, meaning to say they were not mature, they were not able to fulfill their function, and hence they shattered. To regulate the Eir, to fragment the divine energy, the lower we go, the more abundant the kelim are, meaning to say the more they are able to fulfill their function, the more his chalkus there is, the more fragmentation there is. So that's a quantitative abundance. V'zeu atam shakelim de tikkun. That is the reason that the vessels of tikkun kol kechol shenimshachim lamata yeser yishribu yeser bekelim. The lower we go from the kelim of tikkun and lower, the more kelim there are. Meaning to say, the more the function of the keli is pronounced over the earth. Hence, what do we get? The lower we go, more concealment, less revelation of divine energy. Why? Because the kelim become more quantitative the further down the chain order of creation we go. The lihiyos on the top of Mem Aleph, shaharibu bekamus, being that when we talk about the abundance in reference to the kelim, we're talking about a quantitative abundance, and the Rebbe defines it hainu shaharibu, that the abundance is mitzada is chalkus as a result of the fragmentation. Being that the lower we go, the more fragmentation there is. Therefore, automatically, by definition, the abundance of the kelim is increased. This is not the case when we talk about the divine lights, the toyu, the divine energies of toyu. When we talk about abundance in the context of the kelim, the vessels of toyu, we're talking about a qualitative abundance. Therefore, kol shehu l'mayla yeser hu riba yeser. The higher you go in terms of eir, the more abundant it is. Meaning to say, the more powerful the divine energy is, the higher you go. The more revelation there is, the more powerful it is. Why? Because the abundance is not as a result of the fragmentation. In other words, the fragmentation being a synonym for quantity, but rather we're talking about an abundance resulting from the infiniteness of God's infinite light, which is Riba Ve'echus, a qualitative abundance. We can return to this concept in this tomorrow, but at least we've gotten into it.